Okay, this is Dale Branda again, and I'm with Stewart Advisors. Welcome to the first in a series of webinars that we're going to do that we hope are going to cover a range of topics of interest to our clients and our business partners and some other friends of the firm. Our next webinar is going to be on June 26th, and we're going to be looking at the topic of choosing and funding the right college. We'll have some more information about that webinar at the end, but today we're here to discuss securing you and your business against cyber threat. To help present, I'm joined by an expert in the area, Dave Davenport. Dave is the CEO.
Hi, guys.
Hi, Dave.
How are you?
Dave's the CEO of Mother G. That's an IT company that specializes in providing IT managed services for a lot of small and mid-sized businesses. We reached out to Dave hoping to find someone not only with expertise in this topic, but also somebody who understands the kind of issues that business owners we know face. People who run small and medium-sized firms with sometimes limited time and resources for IT support. So I'm going to turn things over to Dave in just a minute, but before I do, I want to talk a bit about Stewart Advisors and why we're hosting a webinar on a topic like this. For those of you who know us, we are a financial planning and investment firm, and our mission is to help individuals, families, and business owners realize their goals by making good financial decisions. We provide a range of services, as you can see, and we often work with business owners on issues related to both their business and their personal financial life. We know for many of you, your business and your personal goals are intertwined. We want to help our clients develop a consistent financial plan for all of it. Generally, our approach is to get to know our clients and really understand their goals and their concerns. We try to work closely with them over the long term to create a financial plan and then help them make intelligent decisions as issues come up and even modify the plan as goals change in response to real life and the events that they encounter. We work on a fee-only basis, and we think this lets us serve as an unbiased consultant so we can give you the best advice for each individual client. And that brings us back to today's webinar. We talk to a lot of clients like you, and we know there's a lot of concern about the security of intellectual property and client data. It's also something that we worry about a lot, and I can tell you in my role at Stewart, I spend a lot of time trying to make sure that our client information is as safe as it can possibly be. So we know that data security is not something that's directly in our area of expertise, so we thought it made sense to bring in somebody like Dave for the benefit of all of us. And so with that, I'm going to turn control over to Dave and let him take you through securing your business against cyber threats.
Thanks, Dale. Take control of your screen here. Okay, I have control, and we are going to talk about securing your business and yourself to some extent against the cyber threat. What we'll talk about today are the types of threats, what trends we've seen in 2017. I get asked the question, it's 2018 now. Most of the studies that we have are current, and they are for what we know, which largely happened in 2017, which is an indicator of what might be happening in 2018, but of course we can't know that. And then what are 10 best practices to improve your cybersecurity threat profile? So let's jump into it. So a lot of what we're going to talk about, although there are some additional sources, but the primary source here is SonicWall's cybersecurity threat for 2018. It's the 2017 Lay of the Land and Trends report. They do an excellent job at researching this topic. They are one of the leaders in cybersecurity, and the research is quite extensive. So we use that a lot in our planning. People ask, what are the most common threats? Here's a list. I won't go through them all. If you're curious about any of them, feel free to post a question, and as the questions come up, if we get too many questions, I'll pause, and Dale will quiz me on those questions, and I'll respond. And we'll certainly have some time at the end for any of your Q&A. But these are the most common threats that you would experience, most notably ransomware, and we'll talk about a few of these a little more in detail. Yes, you know, password attacks, it's one of the easiest things for us to prevent, and it is still one of the most common threats. So ransomware, we'll talk a little bit more about, but these are all the ways that people are trying to steal your money or your identity. Intellectual cap. So what's the impact of these? The common, probably most significant, is some sort of data theft or data loss. And as a byproduct of that, we have the financial losses. We have identity theft. We have, you know, what would be considered a combination of data loss and financial loss, which is being held ransom through ransomware, where they encrypt your files and steal the access to your information and then charge you a ransom to gain it back. So these are very serious threats to businesses and individuals as well. A growing trend is in what we might refer to corporate espionage, where organizations are actually being targeted to steal information. And most people think they're too small as businesses for this to be a threat, and yet what we're seeing is a very significant growth in attacks to small businesses for probably two reasons. Number one, they're in the supply chain of large, sophisticated technologies. So take a Boeing aircraft. A lot of small businesses contribute manufacturing in that supply chain and thus have access to a lot of very secret information. And second, those small businesses generally do not have large IT departments to manage their security. So it's actually a growing threat. And I say that to point out the fact that this security threat is something that impacts everyone, not just the rich and famous or large and very international in corporate profile. I think probably the biggest headline breach was the Equifax breach. Equifax is a credit reporting company. This affected 143 million U.S. consumers, which is somewhere in the ballpark of about a third of the population of the United States. So when you think about that, that is a very significant breach of personal information, birth date, social security, driver's license numbers, very secure information in the area to steal your identity and create false accounts, which can be extremely cumbersome to resolve. So a huge breach, and I point this out because, you know, those are the ones that gain most exposure, but they're using exactly the same techniques that would be used to attack a small business. I think this is really interesting. We see ransomware actually volume is down, but the variants that are being used are up. So think of this as a variation of an attack. So the number of attacks are down, but they're increasing the variations, which makes it more difficult to identify the ransomware coming in. You know, using some of the techniques we're going to talk about, whether it be through secured traffic connections or different hiding techniques in sending the threats in. This aspect, though, I found really interesting. They're actually enhancing the sales tactics in play in the ransomware attack. So here we have three examples where they're providing technical support. If you're having trouble paying your ransom, please use this contact form and we'll help you. The second one, limited time offer. Pay us within the next 4.5 days or we're going to terminate the encryption key and you will be left with no decryption forever. Or the third one, try it before you buy it. We'll let you decipher one file before you pay us. So if you consider the fact that they're adding services around collecting the ransom for the attack that they've initiated, that should give you an idea of the level of sophistication of these cyber threats. And by the way, these threats are not just at big companies. They're at anyone who happens to click the phishing email or downloads inadvertently an encryption file from a website. So very prevalent. Malware attacks bounced back. We saw a decline in them in 2015 to 16, but we saw them bounce back in 2017. And we think that's a result in the ability for them to use malware in generating some of these financial successes, whether it's hacks into your network or ransomware, identity theft, data theft, whatever the case may be. But they're using some of these older style viruses to jump in and gain access to your networks. So this is a good news, bad news trend. SSL is a secure socket link that basically encrypts. It makes data unreadable to the outside world from point A to point B. So if you were going to conduct a banking transaction, you wanted to transfer money with your bank and you wanted to log into that account, you would want to make sure that that URL that you type into your browser is HTTPS rather than HTTP. And that S makes it a secure link, which is great news. We see a huge increase in that from 2015 to 2017 today, where the HTTP traffic has declined dramatically and the HTTPS traffic has increased. So this is good news that we're starting to see a lot more traffic on the internet being over secure links. Of course, there's bad news, and that is that the cyber criminals are using those secure links at times to hide the malicious content that they are spreading through those links. And so just that because you're on an HTTPS site does not make it a secure site. You still need to make sure that you're using safe browsing techniques in that connection. Internet of Things. A lot of people don't know what this is or understand it. It's a huge trend, huge growth. Devices today, there's 8 billion IoT devices today. By 2020, they think that'll be threefold in size and growth. So what are they? If you have a new car, your car can connect to, I have a Ford, it talks right to Ford, tells Ford when my oil's low, it can identify where my car is, I can start it remotely, etc. If you have security cameras or you have the new doorbell that you can log into your phone and see who's ringing your doorbell and dial 911 if you want it as a byproduct. Those are examples of IoT devices and they are pervasive both in industry as well as growingly in the consumer market. The problem is that these devices are ripe for attack. A fitness device indicating when you're asleep, your car knowing where it is, how fast it's driving, recording conversations, hacking into the speaker in your car where people can listen in to you. Your thermostat at home, that smart thermostat that knows when you're home and when you're away. If a bad actor wanted to know whether you're home or not, regardless of what your lights are doing, they might just hack into that thermostat and now they know whether you're there. And if you have smart security devices, might they be able to hack in and unlock your doors and disable your alarm, knowing when you're away, which would make robbing you a very simple thing. So, and there's this example where Fitbit, the application was able to prove that a woman was awake and walking around at the time she claimed she was asleep and molested. So, you know, this technology is something to be very aware of what it's doing, and it is ripe for threats. There's another aspect that we call shadow IT. Shadow IT is really an individual who installs software on their computer without the IT department sanctioning it. So you download an application because you need to come up with a movie image for a website that you're publishing, and IT said they wouldn't be able to help you for another month. So you just download this application that the web developer suggested, and you load the image yourself and take care of it. That's what we call shadow IT. It's done for a lot of different reasons. Speed, it's cheap. IT departments can be a pain to work with because they're always talking about this thing called security, and it's pervasive. People doing this, it's estimated somewhere around 75% of the employees, including CEOs, are doing it, and most CEOs consider it a negative response, and yet they're doing it themselves. Which introduces the idea of what threats it brings to bear. These shadow IT applications can become sources of unsecure connections, whether they be specific malware or whether they're unintentionally or intentionally installed. They can create problems. And when we consider that most 50% of the data breaches that organizations experience come from within the organization, this is a huge threat for most corporations. They worry about all of these technologies about limiting security, and yet 50% of them are coming from the employees. So it's a huge threat when we think about this shadow IT and what users are doing, their behaviors. It's unclear whether it's an innocent mistake, whether it's a malicious attack, or whether they're just trying to get their job done. But regardless of the reason and cause, it is a huge threat for organizations. So really this insider threat, the biggest foe is that we lack visibility to what those threats are. So I think it's very important that we try and use these best practices as means of enhancing visibility. Okay, I see there's a few questions. Let me go ahead and answer these quickly while we're here, and then I'll go into what we can do to remediate. So Mike asks, how often do you recommend passwords be changed? Really, NIST has changed the standard on passwords. Really, the fundamental has always been change your passwords frequently and make them complex. Complex means at least 8 characters in length, longer is better. Make them alphanumeric with special characters, upper lowercase. And this just increases the variation of that password significantly and makes it more difficult to hack. The new standard is that more complex and longer is better, but because it's more complex and longer, it makes it harder to remember, and thus changing it often results in bad behaviors, like people writing it down or putting it in a simple notepad on their computer in a file called passwords, something as silly as that. And so what they recommend is less frequent changes, but more complex passwords. So I would say if you have a very complex password, say 12 to 15 characters, that is complex, upper, lower with special characters, you could change that once every 90 days and be pretty secure. But it is also notable that we want to keep different passwords for different sites, applications, and software. So we don't want to use the same password for our bank accounts as we use for Amazon, as we use for IMDb or whatever other sites. We want to keep multiple passwords for that. Yeah, I'm asked, can you get a copy of the slide deck? Absolutely. When we're done, we will publish a copy of the slide deck to any recipient that wants it. And then last, we're asked, what do you mean by safe browsing techniques for HTTPS encryption security? So I will come to that in one of the best practices. If I don't cover it specifically, I'll swing back and answer it again. But let's go ahead and jump into the best practices for remediating these risks. So really 1 through 4 in talking through cybersecurity measures really relates to the workstation environment that most users are using, your laptop, desktop, that kind of thing. And the number 1 most important recommendation, best practice, is restricting users' installation of applications. So remember that shadow IT I was talking about? Well, here's the remediation for that specific issue. Let's restrict what users can install on their machine. App control or whitelisting, this is where we provide allowable applications for users to install. It doesn't mean you have to, but it means if you want to install a weather app, this is the one to install. And this is how to install it. So we provide guidance around how to install certain applications that might be available. But this would then force any user who's trying to install software to going to the IT department to ask for help. Which can be a pain, but too bad. We're trying to restrict the severe risks of these cyber threats. The second one is ensuring that the operating system on that device is current and updated. Microsoft has gone to great lengths to make this less cumbersome, where in a lot of cases now the software is getting updated automatically. But you want to think in this case beyond just your workstation. You want to think about your cell phone or your iPad or whatever tablet device you want to use. So I know on an Apple device now you can turn on auto update, where it will automatically download and update the phone automatically. These are really helpful techniques at keeping devices secure. This also spans into the server architecture of most organizations to make sure that the operating system on every device, not just the workstations, are being updated regularly. And this is a really key aspect in good cybersecurity controls. It also helps with overall IT management, but in this case, it is a very important step for cybersecurity. Ensuring all software applications are updated. Now you can say, well, what's the difference between number 2 and number 3? Well, your operating system is like Microsoft Windows 10, and the applications might be Microsoft Word or Adobe or JavaScript that has to run, for example, in the background to make certain web applications run, etc. These are the software applications, and most machines have hundreds of applications installed. End users don't realize there's that many applications because there's a lot of things that are installed that facilitate other things running, like Flash is an application that gets installed that enables certain imaging to work on a web browser. So you don't realize that Flash is installed, but that's a third-party application that in specific case has had security vulnerabilities in the past that have allowed bad actors to take control of your machine. So all of these third-party applications must be updated just like number 2. Very critical aspect in cybersecurity. Last one at this level is to restrict the administrative privileges of the user. So for example, being an administrator, having administrative rights on your machine allows you to install software. If we remove that ability, you are limited in what you can install. Now, it doesn't completely restrict you, but it does provide a great deal of limitation. It also limits your controls in what you're able to access on the machine. And certainly, we want to have very limited administrative privileges on the overall infrastructure of your systems. Now, you would say, well, of course, that would be the case. But yet, we find numerous examples in smaller organizations where there are many users that have administrative rights to the network infrastructure, and that is a huge risk. Somebody, maybe it's the office manager, having administrative rights to Active Directory would allow a bad actor who was able to hack that password of the office manager now can take complete control of your entire network and all of the assets that it's running. So a very important aspect. These are the first four. Number 5 is the perimeter security. Most people think of this in a very simplistic way of their firewall. Oh, I have a firewall, I'm good. Well, first of all, firewall many times is not enough, and firewalls have gone beyond what they've been known for historically. We now refer to them as perimeter security because there can be many aspects to that perimeter security, not just a firewall. We want, and I won't go through these in detail, they're pretty technical, but we definitely want those devices updated. We want to check them regularly, so you can have a very good firewall running, and yet it can still have ports open to the outside world. And this is where we want to add these additional layers of security on that perimeter besides just the firewall to check, scan, and prevent things like intrusion detections and intrusion prevention. Additionally, there are systems out there that are live in businesses that may have punched a hole through that security layer and are open to the outside world. Things like HVAC systems that are reporting their performance to the maintenance company, or security cameras that you have running. It might even be your security system that's plugged into ADT, and it's writing your corporate network as a means to get that information out. Those systems must be secured, and you really need to take a hard look at whether they really need to ride your corporate network and allow that vulnerability to exist there. There are ways to address those problems. We want to make sure they're patched. We want to potentially segregate them into a separate network, and certainly validate that their passwords are very complex, because this is going to be the largest attack point of any network. We want to wisely manage access and permissions. Sounds basic, but I cannot tell you how common of a problem this is when we take over a corporate network. What happens? You have employees who join and leave, and when they leave, we don't want to just delete all their accounts, because then we lose all the information that was there. Maybe a salesman's left, and we want all of their account information, or we have an office manager who had a lot of information around financial reporting or whatnot, and we don't want to delete all those files. And so we end up with all of these latent accounts in the environment that are sitting open, that have access, that if a bad actor was able to get their password, which, by the way, they're probably stale, they could log in and gain access to the network. Flash back to those administrative rights and some of those other sloppiness in security principles, and we can have a huge level of vulnerability in our corporate network. So this is something that we want to review regularly and update. Make sure that we have the right HR policies in place about what's acceptable use, who has access to what information, so that we don't have payroll files being accessed by our shop floor employees. Whatever the case may be, we want to be very deliberate and specific about how we manage who has access to what. Certainly near and dear to our heart, and very important aspect, is to make sure that you have a good array of technology to manage that security. We've talked about some of these, certainly malware protection, perimeter security, content filtering, safe browsing. This is back to some of that safe browsing, which I'll touch on in a moment, but we want to limit where we allow users to go. And this is going to help us not only in protecting the environment from some of those safe user behaviors, but also a common way of preventing or limiting the exposure of ransomware. And then certainly back to that patch management update, keeping all that software updated, having a good tool can make that a whole lot easier than trying to do it manually. and then having our policies that we defined in the previous page automated through tools like Active Directory can certainly secure your environment more completely and comprehensively. But we also, and notably, if you're in a regulated business like HIPAA or maybe FINRA or some other NIST compliance, maybe if you're an aeronautics manufacturer or something, you may need enhanced security tools like event monitoring or intrusion detection and prevention or penetration testing on a regular basis. You need to consider those aspects and the risk profile that you have. So if you have highly secure, highly sensitive data, you're more likely going to want to spend more money on these security tools and make sure that they're administered properly. So the analogy I would give, if you're an aerospace manufacturer, you're probably going to want a lot of sophisticated technology. If you're a hot dog stand, you probably don't need much. We want to strictly limit and monitor who has remote access. So CEO says, I want to be able to work from home. Great. Let's make sure that that connection is very secure. Let's make sure that the device that they're logging into is limited in what it can infect, in case that is the same device that the CEO's children are using on their daily browsing, which can infect it with a lot of malware. So let's just be really careful, and let's really interrogate who has access. So you know, there are third-party vendors in the supply chain many times that provide access into your network to gain information. So whether it's supply chain looking at order status and whatnot, or clients doing the same, we want to be very careful about who has access and how we grant that, and then make sure that we monitor that so that they don't end up in places they shouldn't be, which would be an indication of a bad actor. So that safe browsing really falls into training the personnel. We want our team to understand the types of social engineering and phishing attacks that are common. How do people get, how do bad actors get your employees and your family really to click on those links that are going to encrypt their systems or load those data copying techniques that will allow them to steal information from your systems. We want users to understand how that happens. We want to train them on passwords and what it's like to have a strong password, and what we have is acceptable use. We don't want employees looking at explicit material at work, and that should be expressly forbidden. Otherwise, there's deniability on their part. So when we talk about safe browsing habits, you know, fundamentally, if, for example, your bank sends you an email and says there's suspicious activity on your account, please log in and check these transactions, and then they show a transaction or a dollar amount that is sizable and seems suspicious, and you're saying, oh, I wonder if somebody's trying to get into my account, and what do? They say log in here, and they have a little button. That button likely is taking you to an erroneous site. It could be that you click that button and it downloads an encryption tool and encrypts the data on your systems. It could also take you to a site where it looks just like Citibank, and you log in your credentials, but it doesn't work. And you try a couple of times and you think, oh crap. And then it actually redirects you to the legitimate site, and you log in, and lo and behold, bam, you're in there. And you're like, oh, that was weird. I tried twice and it didn't work. Oh, I must have hit the wrong key. But now they have those credentials, and they can use those credentials to hack into your account and do some things. So we want to train the users on what is okay, what is not okay, what are the common attacks. And there are tools now that we can use that will actually automate this training. So we'll send them an erroneous email. If they click on it, we'll flag it as a problem, and then show them what they did wrong, why it was a bad behavior, and what they should be looking for going forward. So it's a immediate feedback type of tool, and has proven to raise that behavior and skills awareness significantly in the users. Last is one that we don't want to forget about, and that is this physical security over the vulnerable infrastructure. And I would even make it more general, as I think about it, to vulnerable information, not just infrastructure. So for example, it's not uncommon to have a password for kind of a master password that should something happen to you, somebody could gain access to your system. So in that example, it may be okay to have a password written down that would allow somebody who has information, could combine that information and log into your account. Wherever you store that password, it better be pretty secure. So beyond that, access to your servers. A lot of people put their servers in their closets. What happens if an employee gets upset with them? Now, you may say, well, I have no choice, but yet you really do. We don't have to leave a server alone in a closet. We can, sure, it can be in there and that's fine, but let's back it up to the cloud. Let's allow that information to be stored elsewhere so that should there be a bad actor, we can recover from it and not impugn the livelihood of the organization as a byproduct. You might consider moving that server from the closet to the cloud. These are very reasonable solutions today. We're seeing an uptick in trend of on-premise to private cloud, which it doesn't mean it's in AWS, which was actually breached. Again, news in today was that Amazon Web Services hosting facility was breached. So, you know, you don't have to necessarily introduce that kind of risk, but there are many solutions about moving your servers to the cloud that can limit your exposure. And then lastly, make sure that you have very solid backups with frequent updates to the backup. So you're updating often, not just once a day, but multiple times a day. And potentially, if your business requires it, look at your failover options to make sure that should somebody, for example, encrypt your entire server infrastructure, you could fail over to a previous version and be live again immediately. So those are the best practices. Do we have any questions?
Dave, we did answer a couple along the way, and we're running a little short on time. I do want to just quickly circle back to the question that was asked about HTTPS encryption. I think the answer is that, you know, we want to make sure that when you're accessing a website, if it's available at all, that you're using the URL that contains HTTPS. And
yes.
Is there any other piece of that people should know?
Yeah, I think the key there is that we would not want to conduct any purchase transactions, any kind of financial transactions, provide any kind of personal information. Doctor, you know, says, please log in and update your medical records, something like that. We would not want to do that over any connection that did not have that S in the HTTP. Any kind of HTTP connection can be intercepted by a bad actor.
Okay. Well, Dave, thanks a lot for joining us today. There's a lot of great information. And as we said, we will be posting a video or an audio recording of this webinar to our website. And we will also reach out to those of you who attended with the slides themselves if you'd like them. So with that, I think we'll end for today. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you.